Alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. In this short video, inshallah al-Aziz, we'll go through three surahs today for our reflection upon the beautiful Qur'an. The first surah, which is Surah 13, is Surah Al-Ra'd, which means the thunder in Arabic. And the relationship between this surah and the preceding surah is that both Surah Yusuf and Surah Al-Ra'd relate stories of previous prophets and emphasize the oneness and the might of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the place of revelation for this particular surah is in Madinatul Munawwara. The summary of this particular surah, Surah Al-Ra'd, is that it is called the thunder because in it Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about signs of His power, such as thunder, such as lightning, such as storms, and such as rain as well. Water and rain give life, while thunder and storms are forces of destruction. So the juxtaposition of these signs inspire awe in the believers and remind everybody about the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Surah Al-Ra'd also presents many signs of the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in His creation. And this surah affirms the resurrection and the reward and the punishment in the hereafter, and the fact that even prophets of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are still human beings, they're still a creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we are also looking at the signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the coronavirus with the COVID-19 and various other situations, and we need to realize that this is in the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us to reflect upon His power and turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because when you see the power, then you become powerless, and you should submit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who has the power to alleviate you from all of your difficult situations. The next surah is Surah Ibrahim, which is Surah 14 in the Qur'an. And Ibrahim is relating to Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam. And this surah as well is a connection to Surah Al-Ra'd. Surah Ibrahim is an extension of Surah Al-Ra'd because both surahs speak about the Qur'an and the signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in His creation. And both surahs give metaphors of the truth and also metaphors of falsehood, so that you can understand via various different examples from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This surah was revealed in Makkatul Mukarramah, and Surah Ibrahim was called Surah Ibrahim because it tells part of the story and the journey and the discovery of Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam, including his life when he entered into Makkatul Mukarramah and he left his wife there and his child there in a barren and desolate area where there was no Kaaba, there was no water, nothing. And he said, رَبَّنَا إِنِّي أَسْكَنْتُ مِنْ زُرِّيَّتِي بِوَادٍ غَيْرِ ذِي زَرْعٍ عِنْدَ بَيْتِكَ الْمُحَرَّمِ. Subhanallah. But he said, رَبَّنَا لِيُقِيمُوا الصَّلَاةَ فَاجْعَلْ أَفْئِدَةً مِنَ النَّاسِ تَهْوِي إِلَيْهِمْ. That I've left them here in this barren and desolate land, but they're here for your worship, for your remembrance, for your zikr. This is what He left them for. So we're here on this dunya as well for the remembrance and the zikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Surah Ibrahim also talks about the relationship of Ibrahim alayhi salam that he had with the Arabs, the construction of the Kaaba, وَإِذْ قَالَ إِبْرَاهِيمُ رَبِّ اجْعَلْ هَذَا الْبَلَدَ آمِنًا, the construction and the foundation of the Kaaba. And the surah also affirms the fundamentals of creed, such as the belief in the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the belief in the messengers of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the belief in the resurrection towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the concept of reward and punishment from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Surah Ibrahim is a very, very beautiful surah because he is the Ibrahim alayhi salam is the patriarch of the Abraham, of all of the religions, of Musa alayhi salam, of Isa alayhi salam, and of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam. So we all look towards the story of Ibrahim alayhi salam with great love and respect, and also for us to learn a huge amount from the sacrifices of Ibrahim alayhi salam and the family of Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam, especially his wife and especially his child Sayyidina Ismail, who was there ready to sacrifice himself in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And finally, Surah 15, which is Surah Al-Hijr, which means the rocky tract. And the relationship between Surah Al-Hijr and the previous Surah, Surah Ibrahim, is that they both start with the descriptions of the Qur'an, and they also share similar content, and they both relate the stories of the previous prophets, and this is solely to comfort the Messenger alayhi salatu wasalam, so that he can be reassured that This is what happened to previous prophets and messengers, and here we are reassuring you, Ya Rasulullah, that you will be able to get through this as well, and you'll be able to overcome all of these things. So there, to comfort the Messenger alayhi salatu wasalam, because of the persecution that he was facing from his own people, from his own family members, from his own tribe, from his own community, and to remind the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam of the victory from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So often within our lives as well, we find lots of difficulties thrown our way from our own family, from our own friends and communities, but our yaqeen, our reliance and tawakkul needs to be in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because if you're doing something for the sake of Allah, you're doing it for the pleasure of Allah, you're doing it sincerely, then know that victory and success will undoubtedly come from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So both of these surahs, Surah Ibrahim, Surah Hijr, give descriptions of the heavens and also of the earth. And as for their endings, Surah Ibrahim ends with a description of the believers on the day of judgment. And Surah Hijr also ends with a description, but of how the disbelievers will feel remorse and feel grief seeing the sinners among the Muslims being freed from the fire of hell and going to paradise. So here again we see in this particular surah, in Surah Al-Hijr, that on the day of Qiyamah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even though you have done sins, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ultimately, due to your belief in the oneness of Allah azza wa jal, and due to you following the Messenger alayhi salatu wasalam, will inevitably one day, perhaps in 100 years or 1,000 years, perhaps 10,000 years, but ultimately Muslims will be freed from the fire of hell and they will ultimately end in paradise. This is due to their belief in the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But those who completely disbelieved in the existence of Allah azza wa jal, then they will not have that same reward or that same relief from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala of being taken out of the fire of hell and going into Jannatul Firdaus. So this surah, Surah Al-Hijr, was revealed in Mecca, and it outlines the creed and also presents evidence of the unity of the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, describes the day of judgment and the state of the believers and the disbelievers on the day of Qiyamah as well, how the Muslims will feel, and those who are true Muslims, they'll be content and they'll be calm because they'll be under the banner of the Messenger alayhi salatu wasalam, they'll be under the shade of the throne of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and their hearts will not stutter, their hearts will not flutter. Why? Because they knew this day would come. Whereas the disbelievers who denied it throughout their lives, they will be in complete fear on that particular day. So this surah talks about that day, the description of the day of Qiyamah and the state of the believers and the disbelievers on the day of Qiyamah. Also talks about the previous prophets and messengers of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And most importantly, towards the end of the surah, it describes the favors of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala upon the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa sallam. And this was to reassure and to comfort the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, and to remind him that Allah azza wa jal will not just throw those followers of the Messenger alayhi salatu wasalam into the fire of hell. So the reward of the people of taqwa on the day of Qiyamah and the concept of forgiveness from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is there as a favor from Allah azza wa jal to the Messenger Muhammad sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa sallam and to the ummah of the Messenger Muhammad sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa sallam. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala enable us all to reflect upon this particular surah in the beautiful month of Ramadan. Jazakumullahu khairah.